You just got lucky. If you're looking to play the Gunlance in Monster Hunter Rise, clicking on this video was the best thing you could possibly do. How can I make such a bold claim? Simple. Because the most popular Gunlance tutorials on YouTube are outdated and wrong. Since those other tutorials were published, Capcom has made some significant changes to how the Gunlance works. So any tutorial or guide, or even a website that's older than a few months ago, that's claiming to have the best combos and playstyles is completely out of date. All those base game meta guides, useless now. See, nobody's bothered to go back and update their stuff. Don't worry though, I got you covered. First thing I want to make clear, Gunlance is a melee weapon. You might think it's half melee, half ranged, but that's not really true. It's half melee, half explosive device. The shelling portion of the weapon works like explosives, not like bowgun ammo. And it's really short range, like bombs, not like bowgun ammo with its much longer range. Bomb Lance is a more appropriate name, but just doesn't sound as cool as Gunlance. Now, the downside to shelling is that it does decrease your sharpness, so it's not just a bunch of free explosive damage. There is a cost to it. Different Gunlances have different shelling types. There are 3 different shelling types: long, normal, and wide. The type of shelling you choose determines what playstyle is going to be most effective for you. Long and normal shelling type are similar to each other, but wide shelling actually gives you more features at the cost of a lower shell capacity. Most people will tell you to avoid wide shelling. They'll tell you that normal and long have higher DPS and therefore wide shelling isn't worth using. Nothing could be further from the truth. You can be just as effective with wide shelling as the other two. You just have to use a different playstyle. And once you get into it, you just might realize that you prefer that playstyle. It's actually a lot of fun to use wide shelling. There are a couple more myths I'll just deal with right up front. You're gonna hear a lot of people say that Gunlance is a high commitment weapon. They think that the best moves for Gunlance lock you into the animation and make you vulnerable. This is also a fallacy that is easily debunked simply by evading. Every weapon can be considered high commitment if you don't learn how to use your evades properly. The other myth you'll hear about is that Gunlance is not very mobile. It's hard for me to imagine someone with hundreds of hours of Gunlance practice saying these things, but yeah, some prominent Gunlance users do indeed spread these myths. As you'll see throughout this video, Gunlance has plenty of ways to move around the board quickly, easily, and dare I say, with more movement range than most other weapons in the game. You're going to start the game with 2 switch skills. The first one is Hail Cutter. This one's going to give you 2 big hits, one on the way up, one on the way down, and it's also going to reload your shells while you're up there. The other thing that it does is it cools down your Wyvern's fire. We're going to get to that a little bit later. If you already have shells loaded, when you perform a Hail Cutter, you can do an aerial burst or aerial shelling. If you do aerial shelling, you will not get the second big hit on the way down. However, you can do a jumping smash at the end manually. If you do aerial burst, you do not get the option to do a jumping smash. The second switch skill you get is called Guard Edge. I would argue that this is the single most powerful switch skill in the entire game. Watch what this does. It blocks pretty much anything, and it sharpens your weapon in the process. You can follow up the block with some big attacks too. So it's a great way to start off a combo or to sneak in some quick high damage. Notice my sharpness has decreased quite a bit. Watch what happens when we do a Guard Edge. All right, we got some sharpness back. Let's do this again. And then we're almost maxed out. So I can follow that up with a couple different attacks. Let's go Guard Edge, Wormstake Cannon, which we'll get to. Guard Edge, Overhead Smash, which you can follow up with shelling. We'll get to that a little bit later too. Love the Guard Edge. Gunlance does not have special evades, special counters, or special combos right out of the gate, like most other weapons do. But it makes up for this by giving you 3 special shelling attacks. Let's take a look at those. The first one is called Charged Shelling. You're going to press and hold your shelling button, and while you're charging up this attack, you can change the angle from low to mid to high with your stick. The wide shelling type has 2 charge levels on this for even more damage. You don't have to charge it up twice. You can let it go early, or you can hold it a little bit longer. And I really love the adjustment you can do with this. You can even get straight up in the air. And yes, you can follow charged shelling with attacks. So you can start a combo off with charged shelling if you like. You can even do a worm stake to follow it up. The second special shelling that you get is the worm stake cannon. Think of worm stake as a finishing move because it's gonna end your combo. There are too many ways to get into the worm stake. You can't just do it from a standstill. It has to be part of a combo. I'm going to show you a bunch of ways in just a minute. Now, what I want you to pay special attention to is this. When you're doing your worm stake, look at the time between this point and this point. The time between sticking the tip in and blowing the load. That timing changes depending on how you comboed into the worm stake. Some combos give you a faster worm stake, some give you a slower worm stake. Here are several ways to get to the worm stake. First one, do a charge shot, then hold back and press your shelling button again. This one is going to be a faster worm stake. The next one, do a high charged shot. Hold back, press your shelling button. This one is really fast. The next one is guard edge and press your shelling button. And this one is a faster worm stake as well. When you get to the wide sweep move, you can follow it up with a slow worm stake. So you can't just start off doing a wide sweep, you have to combo into it. So let's combo into a wide sweep. Wide sweep, worm stake. This one's a lot slower, as you can see. The full burst, which we will get to, you can follow up a full burst with your shelling button and you will get a slow worm stake. There's one more of note. It is a shell, shell, shell worm stake. And that one's a little slower too. Notice that you have to press a different button depending on what combo you're currently doing. So worm stake cannon is not bound to a single button. And this can get very confusing at times. And this is the one drawback to Gunlance that I think could be changed, that I think you can make a legitimate complaint about. The buttons you need to press to do the same exact move, the buttons change based on what combo you're in. And worm stake is the one move that is the most confusing because you often don't want to do that slow worm stake. And you think you're going to do something else, but you end up doing a worm stake instead. Gunlance takes some time to get the muscle memory down for these combos. So if it's a little rough at the start, that's probably why. They're changing the buttons up on you. So you can see the worm stake gives you a lot of hits. And when you use the wide shelling worm stake, it has a completely different payload. It'll actually attach an explosive device to the monster instead of giving you all those little ticks of damage. And then this explosive device will detonate, and it does quite a bit of damage, and it does stun damage. So you can actually KO a monster with your worm stake cannon. So the initial hit does KO damage as well as the follow-up. That's why I love the worm stake cannon with wide. It's just that much cooler. The third special shelling move is called Wyvern's Fire. This is a big hit, and you can block attacks during the charge up, and you can adjust your aim. It does have a cooldown period before you can use it again, but Hail Cutter will reduce this cooldown period significantly. 3 Hail Cutters is enough to reactivate your Wyvern's Fire. If you have the artillery armor skill, it only takes 2 Hail Cutters, and you're back in action. So Wyvern's Fire starts from a guard. Press both buttons, and you get 3 big hits. Now, it don't look like much right now because, yeah, I'm still a noob on this character. And I really don't have any armor skills either. So you're not going to see a massive difference in damage. The Wyvern's Fire is actually a pretty high damage move. You can adjust your aim. Okay, 3 big hits. Some major attacks will knock you back and interrupt your Wyvern's Fire block, but put a few points of the guard armor skill in and it'll fix that problem. We can just block that incoming attack and get our Wyvern's Fire off. Some big attacks will knock you back. Put the points of guard in and you'll be okay. You'll notice there's a lot of recoil animation at the end of Wyvern's Fire. You can cancel a good portion of that recoil by using a Wirebug skill. We're going to do a Hail Cutter right after the Wyvern's Fire. And it's actually pretty convenient because the Hail Cutter is what's going to cool down your Wyvern's Fire a lot faster. If you need to be in a defensive position after the Wyvern's Fire, then go for the Guard Edge. Okay, those are all your awesome starting moves. Let's take a look at the basic moves and some notable combos. So what can you do from a standstill? What are your basic opening moves? We've got lateral thrust. We've got the rising slash. We've got a lunging upthrust. This is like the rising slash, but it moves you forward a little bit. So you can stay in place or you can move forward a little bit and it gives you that upthrust. We've got shelling. You can just stand here and fire shells. And you can shell after just about any of these basic moves. So you can do a lateral thrust shell. You can do a rising thrust shell. Notice the shelling is going to go high on that. You can do a charged shell from a standstill. And you can start your combo that way too. And you can do from a standstill a full reload. So what a full reload does is this is going to reload all your shells plus your worm stake cannon shell. So you just stand still, guard, press your shell button, which is now your reload button, and you've got everything back. That is a standard full reload. I point that out because there are other ways to reload your shells. What about evading? I mentioned that earlier. To evade, press your evade button. You can back evade. You can forward evade. After an attack, you can sidestep. Otherwise, you're just going to turn and face to the side. So this side evade, you'll notice, is really nice. You move quite a distance. Put some evade extender on there, you're going to move even further. You can chain 2 in a row. Back hop, it looks like you can just keep going until you run out of stamina. But the side step is 2 in a row. That's your limit. Your forward, you can just keep going until you run out of stamina. Yes, it is okay to guard. Guarding is really nice, and you can move while you're guarding, but Gunlance isn't really designed around the concept of guarding. So yeah, the shield's there, it's powerful, but your evade, your sidestep, is a lot more powerful and a lot more useful because that mobility is really important. So reloading, there's 3 different ways to reload. You're going to get a 4th one later. Right now I showed you the regular reload. There is what's called a quick reload, and quick reload is a reload that you do in the middle of a combo. So you can do a quick reload after certain attacks. So quick reload is the trigger and your shelling / reload button. And you can quick reload after many different attacks. And the nice thing about quick reload is it lets you load all your shells. It will not reload your worm stake shell, but it'll reload every single shell you have. And you can do it in the middle of combos. And so the quick reload allows you to continue your combo, keep your shells loaded, and continue to full burst. So you can't quick reload after the full burst, or the burst fire as it's called here, but you can do the wide sweep and do a quick reload. You can do a poke quick reload. So let's say you don't got any shells left. You're coming up to the monster. You don't have shells. You don't want to do a full reload. You just want to get right into your combo. All right, so the quick reload after the wide sweep. You just can't do the quick reload after the full burst, which I'm doing right there. And that makes sense because if you could, you would just spam full burst, quick reload, overhead, full burst. It might be just a little too much. I'm sure there's a lot of Gunlance users out there who actually want that ability. The other way to reload, I did briefly mention before. Let's say you've got no shells, you've got wire bugs, you want to do a big move. All right, hail cutter up, shells reload, big hit, and then right back into your combos. You can even do a full burst at the bottom. The nice thing about hail cutter is it loads all your shells for that very reason, so that you can do the full burst once you hit the ground. This is a big move. Wide sweep, reload, and you're back into your combos. Let's take just another close look at the shelling. You've got high shelling and low shelling, and you can shell after just about any attack. So you can poke, shell. You're going to see that a lot. You can do rising slash shell to get a high shell. And you can even just press and hold your shell to do the charged up high. If you do the shell after an overhead smash, you're going to do what's called full burst or burst fire. The game calls it burst fire. Every Gunlance user I know calls it full burst. Don't ask me why. Instead of just firing one shell, it fires the entire clip. Really nice. And so for people who like to play a shelling heavy play style, that full burst is what they're trying to do most often. Let's take a look at the draw attacks you have. Run at the monster, draw your weapon, you'll get a lunging upthrust. If you're just standing still and you draw your weapon, yeah, you're not going to do an attack. You're going to have to push forward and draw your weapon. Lunging upthrust. There you go. Wire bug, jump, a jumping thrust, just as you would expect. Now you can draw your weapon into a guard position. So this one's really nice when you are running right into the thick of things and you just need to be safe. So just run at the monster, pull your trigger, and you're in a guard position. You can also think of this as an attack if you consider the fact that you can perform attacks very quickly from a guard position like this. All right, the guard thrust. So while you're in guard position, you can just attack with a guard thrust. So you can consider that guard thrust a draw move if you do it really quickly. Draw to guard and thrust. Another draw move, you could consider it a draw move. Same thing, we're going to pull the trigger to guard and we're going to go straight into Wyvern's fire. And notice we have the long shelling type. Watch how many ticks of damage this Wyvern fire gives you. Long shelling type, 4 hits of damage, whereas the wide and normal are going to give you 3 ticks of damage. Let's take a look at just a few combos, because as with most weapons, there are just so many combos that you can do. We got a bunch of them down in the bottom left corner of the screen. We have some on the weapon info page as well. So you've got a triple lateral thrust. You can go to a rising slash, and every time you do a rising slash, you can do overhead smash. Notice there's 2 different ways to do an overhead smash. If you do the lunging up thrust, your overhead smash is both attack buttons. If you do both buttons to do a rising slash, then your overhead's going to be just the Y button. So if you're in motion with just a single attack, overhead smash is 2 buttons. If you're standing still and you do the rising with both buttons, your overhead smash is a single button. This is the other confusing aspect to Gunlance. That overhead smash is mapped to 2 different buttons, and it does get confusing, but just keep in mind, if you're pushing a single button to do your rising slash, you have to push 2 buttons to do your overhead. If you're pushing 2 buttons to do your rising slash, you push a single to do your overhead. Very confusing, I know. They could have just remapped things a little bit, but there it is. So the full burst combo that people really love is this. Start it with a rising. You got to get into that overhead slash. Okay, full burst, wide sweep, quick load. And after a quick load, you can do an overhead smash with both attack buttons. This is the combo that people love to spam when the monster's on the ground. And this is also the combo that people complain about has a high animation commitment. Yes, it's because they get caught up in this combo and don't realize, hey, I can just evade in the middle of it. If I need to, I can just break this combo at any time and get to safety. Okay, don't do your full burst, step aside. Or, okay, do your overhead, full burst, wide sweep. Don't do your quick load, get out of there. Get out of there if you need to, okay? Or evade after a quick load. So it's not that high of a commitment. The full burst does have a long animation, but you're doing some massive damage that ignores hit zones. There's going to be a cost to that. Wide sweep has a big animation, but it's a big hit. If everything had the same high speed animation, you'd be playing dual blades. Another combo I want to bring up is generally used for wide shelling, and people call it poke shelling. So you alternate pokes with shells. Nice thing about regular shelling is you can do a quick load after a regular shell. You can't do a quick load after a full burst, but you can do it after a regular shell. You could just sit here and shell non-stop if you really want to. And since the wide shelling gives you more damage per shell than the other two shelling types, it's a very advantageous style of play to use. And you can chain in a worm stake, maybe chain in a charged shell and a worm stake. I'm not going to go through and give you hundreds of different combos. The fun part about Gunlance is discovering your own combos and finding cool ways to put all these things together. Now there's one more cool shelling type that I really love about Gunlance, and that's called aerial shelling. And aerial shelling is just wild. I've got the normal shelling type. You can see I've got a lot more shells, and aerial shelling is just insane. How do I get into aerial shelling? A lot of different ways. You just got to get up in the air. So let's do a hail cutter. When you're up there, just start hitting your shelling button. All right, every time you fire a shell, it kind of boosts you up in the air a little bit. So you drop down and you can stay up in the air so long, and you can change the direction that you're firing your shells. So any way that you can figure out how to get into the air, as long as you're up in the air, you can do aerial shelling. From a wire bug, you're going to press your guard button, your trigger button, and that'll start your aerial shelling. It's just fun as hell. And let's say you're chasing a Raytheon, she's going up for her tail sweep, or somebody else just flying up in the air trying to annoy you. Well, you know what? You can annoy them right back. We have another move that will get you into aerial shelling coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. The first move you're going to unlock when you do your 3-star Village Urgent is Ground Splitter. Ground Splitter is going to replace your Hail Cutter move. Hail Cutter is really awesome. So if you do make this decision, understand what you're giving up. Ground Splitter is going to boost the damage on your shells for a period of time. You can see when Ground Splitter boost is active by looking at your ammo icons. They'll have a glowing outline. Now what Ground Splitter does is it slides you across the ground. It scrapes the tip of your Gunlance on the ground to heat it up, and somehow this is supposed to make your shells do more damage. When you do Ground Splitter, it's going to slide you through any incoming attacks. You will take damage from those attacks, but they're not going to interrupt the move. It will do an attack at the end, so your positioning is important. The cool thing about Ground Splitter is the follow-up attacks. You can do an overhead smash to a full burst and continue your combo, or you can do a worm stake, and you can change the direction of these follow-up attacks as well, 360 degrees. The second unlocking you get is for crafting 8 different Gunlances. This is called Blast Dash. Now, Blast Dash is just fun. The funnest skill in the game, because you can play with it and it just seems so completely useless. It just seems like it's built to have fun, but this is a serious move, which gives you serious mobility. If you like the vertical mobility that Hail Cutter gives you and you don't want to replace it with Ground Splitter, you can keep your Hail Cutter, but pick your Blast Dash. And this is going to give you tons of horizontal mobility. You will lose charged shelling, so keep that in mind. You'll also lose that aerial burst on your Hail Cutter. So yeah, you're going to lose 2 moves by picking Blast Dash. You're not going to lose aerial shelling. You're just going to lose that aerial full burst that you can do on the Hail Cutter. You will gain a rocket ship. This move is great for quick repositioning, covering ground, getting into a full burst quickly. You can chain aerial shelling from this. You can do follow-up attacks. It works a lot like Ground Splitter in its maneuverability and follow-ups. So you don't necessarily need both. Blast Dash is going to consume 1 shell. It doesn't use a wire bug. It uses your shells. It just uses a shell to rocket you across the screen. Ridiculous. Notice it's going to rocket you in the direction that you're facing. So you press and hold as if you're going to do a charged shell, but instead of doing a charged shell, it spins you around and rockets you backwards in the direction you're facing. Just a ton of fun. You can chain this like 3 times. So hold down the trigger and press B. You can chain 3 of these together. Ridiculous mobility. All right, so this will get you into aerial shelling. Press and hold and just start hitting your shelling button. And boom, you're aerial shelling. Nice. You don't have to go far if you don't want to. You can go short range, you can go long range, whatever. All right, and that goes for the other follow-up attacks that Blast Dash has. Yeah, not just aerial shelling. Check this out. You're going to get overhead smash. It's called a jumping smash because technically you're in the air, but it's essentially an overhead smash. So Blast Dash, jumping smash, overhead smash, call it what you will. It works just like the overhead smash because you can follow it with a full burst and get right back into your full burst combo. So the one advantage that Ground Splitter has over the Blast Dash is that you can follow up Ground Splitter with a worm stake. So you can use Blast Dash if you want to do a full burst really quickly. You don't have to use it for mobility. Just use it to get into slam, full burst. Probably the fastest way to get to a full burst. The third unlock you get is from the high rank 6-star Grasp the Gunlance quest. This is called Guard Reload. Guard Reload is going to replace your Quick Reload. Now remember, Quick Reload was a way to quickly reload all your shells, not your worm stake, but all your shells after certain attacks, after most of your basic attacks. If you enable Guard Reload, you no longer get Quick Reload. It's going to replace it with Guard Reload. And what this does is it allows you to block attacks while you're reloading it. It puts your shield up while you reload. Really clever, right? You do have to do it after an attack, just like with Quick Reload, and so you can't do it from a standstill. You can do it after a guard thrust, so you can keep your guard up quite a bit and still reload. You can still attack and then Guard Reload. Notice Guard Reload will load only 3 of your regular shells. It will not reload all your shells. That's the one disadvantage to Guard Load. However, it will block while you're reloading, and it will reload your worm stake. This is a nice reload style to have if you're playing a heavy worm stake play style. And if you have wide shelling, which maxes out at 3 shells, it's perfect for that. It's gonna load all your shells because all you have is 3 shells. But so this Gunlance has 6 shells, and a Guard Reload is only going to give us 3 shells when we use it. So if you have Guard Reload, you don't get your Quick Reload, you don't get all your shells loaded in. And so the combo that I showed before is still there. You have to put an extra step in it, but you don't get to reload all your shells. So let's see what the combo looks like now. Full burst, wide sweep, Guard Reload. We can't do the overhead smash after the Guard Reload. All right, so it breaks this combo, but not entirely. If you're trying to do a full burst combo with Guard Reload, you're not going to get all your shells back. So Guard Reload is definitely not for that play style, if that is your primary combo that you're using. That's not to say you can't use full burst effectively with it, but you're not going to be able to spam that full burst combo over and over again. This covers most of the attacks Gunlance has. I can't show you every single combo in the game. That's just not possible. The fun part is figuring out which combos you like developing a playstyle of your own, and inventing some new effective combos. Next question that comes up, which weapon should you use when you play Gunlance? So you'll notice that each Gunlance has not only a shelling type, but also a shelling level. There's a lot of talk out there about shelling levels and how only 2 or 3 weapons are quote unquote viable due to so many Gunlances not having the highest shelling level. This is just nonsense. Yes, higher shelling level means more damage, but it's not enough to really worry about. The weapons with lower shelling levels typically have other attributes that make up for it. Just be aware that a higher shelling level will give you higher shelling damage, so factor that in when you're deciding which Gunlance is best for you. Having a lower shelling level will not make your quests significantly slower. They will not make it any harder to beat any monster in the game. Which specific weapon you choose to play largely depends on your desired play style. Choose a shelling type that works best for the combos and special moves that you want to use. For example, if you want to use a lot of shelling, charge shelling, aerial burst, wide shelling type will give you much higher damage per shell. If you want to use the full burst in your combos, normal shelling will give you more damage overall with that move because of the higher number of shells you can load. If you want to do a lot of Wyvern's fire attacks, long shelling is a great choice because it will give you 4 hits instead of 3. So after you decide your shelling type, choose a weapon with the element that works against your target monster. If you want an all-purpose Gunlance, go with the Defender weapon early on, then the Nargacuga weapon when it becomes available. The Rampage Gunlance is highly customizable and will probably give you the most bang for your Zenny. What armor skills are useful for Gunlance? First and foremost, load shells. Normal Gunlances have 6 shells, long has 4, wide has 2. Load shells increases the shell capacity by 1, making it 7, 5, and 3 respectively. The guard and guard up skills. Guard up is nice to have, but not necessary. More than 1 point of guard is also nice to have, but again, not necessary. While the Gunlance always has the option for you to block incoming attacks, the weapon really isn't designed around a block-heavy playstyle, contrary to popular belief. If you want lots of cool blocking features, then Lance is where you'll find those. That's not to say you can't develop a playstyle that works well with a lot of points in guard. Of course you can. But you are not required to by any means. Evade Extender 1 point in this skill will do amazing things for you. 3 points of Evade Extender is an insane amount of evade distance, and again, isn't necessary. The reason I keep saying that is because of all the myths that still persist about the quote-unquote skill tax, or as is more often stated, the high skill budget. Artillery. 3 points in artillery. It boosts the damage on your shells. It cools down your Wyvern's fire shot very quickly. If you're going to shell, then you'll definitely want Artillery 3. Believe it or not, there's actually a very effective playstyle that does little to no shelling at all. So again, it all comes down to your desired playstyle. Sharpness management skills. Shelling can eat up your sharpness pretty fast. If you're using the guard edge switch skill liberally, you will not need any more sharpness management than other melee weapons in the game. So look for Protective Polish, Handicraft, Razor Sharp, and Speed Sharpen. If you are building a high affinity build, then Master's Touch is definitely one to consider. All right, where do I hit the monster? Shells ignore hit zones. What this means is you can fire your shells anywhere on the monster and they will do the same amount of damage. Your melee attacks should target the head or some other weak spot. I personally like to fire the shells at the legs in order to get more trips and knockdowns. And finally, the single most important skill to learn when playing the Gunlance, reading the monsters. Know where they're going to be. Plan your attacks to anticipate that. Directionality is very important. And so a lot of your attacks allow you to change direction with follow-up attacks. Take advantage of that. Since this is a beginner's guide, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. You're going to discover your own favorite combos as you experiment. with the weapon. I've got a couple other videos on Gunlance that refute a lot of the myths that are floating around, so check those out and check out the comment section of those videos. You will find that there are so many veteran Gunlance users that just absolutely love the weapon. They love the complexity of it. They don't buy into any of the myths that are out there, and they just enjoy every moment they have playing with it. So leave a comment with any tips that you have for beginners or any additional info you think would be helpful for people learning the Gunlance. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the Discord. A lot of cool information over there, a lot of cool people, players on every platform, and I will see you in the next tutorial.